present and those watching on the webcam. Before we commence the meeting, I'd just like to draw your attention to the fire regulations which are displayed on the screens. No practice fire alarms are planned for this evening, so in the event of the alarm sounding, please leave the building as quickly as possible by one of three exits, 1, 2 and 3. We meet across the road under the canopy outside Waitrose. Can I ask everyone to switch their mobile phones to silent or to off, please? Members of the public, say the committee, we understand that matters under discussion this evening may be emotive. However, I'd ask that you respect all those around you in the public gallery and the committee and refrain from expressing your feelings by booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. This is a meeting held in public, it's not a public meeting. Move on to the, before we move on to the main business, just to introduce the officers in front of me. First of all, Lewis Jones, our legal man. Then Peter Cleveland, Head of Development Control. Louise Yandel, who's the Principal Planning Officer and Head of the Southern and Western Area. And then Sean Ricks, who is Waverley Borough Council Heritage and Design Officer. Historic Buildings Officer is the way I would normally describe you, Sean. So we move on to the main items on the agenda. Item number 1, to confirm the minutes of the last meeting of the JPC that took place on the 18th of October. They've been on the table for half an hour. Is it your wish I sign them as a true record of that meeting? Item 2, apologies for absence and declarations. Emma, please.
We have apologies for absence from Councillors Mike Band, John Ward and Stuart Stennett, and Councillor Andy McLeod is in attendance as a substitute. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Item 3, declarations of interest prior to the meeting. Emma, what have we had?
None prior to the meeting.
Thank you. Questions, members of the public, Emma?
None received.
None? Right, let's move on to the application for planning permission. It was first registered on the 21st of March 2017. A1, land at Sturt Farm, Sturt Road, Haslemere, GU273SE. Alteration, extension, landscaping and improvements to existing access from Sturt Road to the land to the rear of Sturt Farm, and the provision of a suitable alternative natural green space, a saying. And the officer introducing this is Louise Yandel. All yours, Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. The application site is located on the eastern side farm and the cluster of buildings around Sturt Farm, and an area of agricultural land to the southeast which is not currently in any formal use. This is an aerial photograph. The area to the northeast of the site here has been granted planning permission for 135 dwellings. To the immediate southeast and northwest of the site, here and here, are a cluster of listed buildings and a building of local merit. These previously formed Sturt Farm and its ancillary buildings, but are now all currently in residential use. These top 2 photographs show the junction of the existing access with Sturt Road. The bottom left photograph is taken from the existing access road looking towards Sturt Road itself, and the final photograph is taken from the top of the existing access road looking towards the site where up to 135 dwellings was granted. These photographs show the listed buildings and building of local merit which flank the existing access road. This is the proposed master plan with the area of the site outlined in red. The proposal includes the change of use of the southeast of the site, which is here, from agricultural land to public open space to be used as a sang. The proposal also includes the change of use of part of the land to open space here, which is not part of the sang itself. This was also included in the 2014 permission for up to 135 houses, which has not yet been implemented. Finally, the proposal includes alterations to the existing access road, which currently serves Sturt Farm and the cluster of residential dwellings, and improvements to Sturt Road itself. This slide shows the existing plans, with the existing access serving Sturt Farm and the other residential dwellings, and it also imposes the consented access, which is to the north of the application site. The existing access would be widened and formalised with a 5.5 metre wide carriageway and 1.8 metre footpaths either side of the access. Improvements are also proposed to Sturt Road to include widening the existing junction and minor realignment of the carriageway. The new access would have a greater impact on the neighbouring occupiers by reason of noise and disturbance, as it is closer to the residential dwellings. However, the Council's Environmental Health Officer has raised no objection to the proposal overall. The access road would cut through the middle of the listed buildings and building of local merit. In officers' view, this would lead to less than substantial harm to the heritage assets, as it would dilute the setting of these buildings and reduce the ability to appreciate the space as a historic farmyard. When less than substantial harm is identified, it is the responsibility of the decision maker to weigh the public benefits against the identified harm, and it is only where the public benefits are considered to outweigh the identified harm that planning permission should be granted. In this instance, there are a number of public benefits which have been put forward by the applicant. I will now outline those of which have been given weight by officers in forming their recommendation. The first benefit is in relation to landscape impact and the impact on the character of the street scene. As members will have seen from the site visit, and is demonstrated in these photographs on the screen, there is a large amount of engineering associated with the proposed access that has been approved. The image at the bottom of the page gives an idea of the extent of excavation required, with the new access here and the large retaining wall, and this is Sturt Farm and the existing access there. These aerial images also give an idea of the extent of engineering required, along with the large retaining wall, which is outlined in black here. So the image on the left is showing you the consented access, and the image on the right shows you the alterations proposed to the existing access as part of this scheme. Officers consider that the proposed access would be an improvement over the consented access in landscape and street scene terms, and significant weight has been given to this benefit. The second benefit is in relation to the speed of delivery. Officers consider that the provision of housing via the proposed access would be able to be delivered quicker. This is because the extent of excavation would be significantly reduced and less work would be involved in the construction process. Members should note that the applicants are required to submit reserved matters for the approved outline scheme within 3 years of the date of that consent, which is by the 30th of March 2018, and that development must commence within 2 years of the approval of the reserved matters. The third benefit is in relation to the number of houses that could be delivered. The outline application on the site to the north was for up to 135 houses. Further work by the applicants has suggested that this number is unrealistic. The indicative plans shown here suggest that 121 dwellings could be delivered with the consented access, and 132 dwellings could be delivered with the proposed access. These plans on screen show how this could be achieved. Given the level of housing need in the borough, this has also been given significant weight. Since the publication of the agenda report, further comments have also been received from the County Highway Authority. They have confirmed that the Highway Authority considers the proposal to utilise the existing access instead of the consented new access to be preferable on highway safety and logistical construction grounds. The County Highway Officer agrees with all the benefits identified by the applicant's highway consultants, in particular that it is preferable to limit the number of new accesses onto classified roads, and the proposal to utilise the existing access will result in significantly less disruption to traffic movement during the construction period in comparison with the previously consented access. Officers consider that in combination, the public benefits outlined outweigh the less than substantial harm to the heritage assets that have been identified. Finally, Can I draw members' attention to the update sheet, which sets out an error in the report in relation to the date the 2014 permission for up to 135 houses was granted. It also clarifies the difference in housing delivery between the proposed access and the consented access are part of the 135 houses already permitted and not in addition to that number. It also sets out 6 additional letters of representation, 2 objecting to the proposal, 2 withdrawing their objections, and 1 raising a procedural point in relation to reconsultation. In relation to this, officers are satisfied that no reconsultation was necessary, but an additional 7-day consultation was in any event sent out in advance of this meeting. The update clarifies that officers have given no weight to any financial benefit for the applicant, as this is not considered to be a public benefit, and that no weight has been given to any viability issues, as no robust evidence was supporting the application. The matters of principal and technical opinion are the loss of the agricultural land, where members should note that the proposal would not result in the loss of the highest quality agricultural land, the impact on the countryside landscape and AONB and AGLB, as previously set out, trees. Members should note that the proposal would not result in the loss of any trees of any visual significance. Highways, and members should note that the County Highway Authority has raised no objections to the proposal in terms of highway safety. Public rights of way, noting that the Countryside Access Officer has also raised no objection. Flooding and drainage, noting that the proposal would result in a reduction in hard standing. Archaeology, noting that the archaeologist has raised no objection as archaeological remains are unlikely to be present. And the effect on the SPA, noting that the proposal includes a SANG which will mitigate for the proposed residential development which has already been consented. The matters for members' judgment are the design of the proposal, residential amenity, and finally, the impact on the heritage assets. Officers' recommendation is for approval, subject to a legal agreement and conditions as set out on the update sheet. In the event that the Section 106 agreement is not signed, officers recommend that permission be refused. Thank you, members.
Louise, thank you very much. We now move to the public speaking, and I ask Nigel Whitehead to have you. You have 4 minutes, sir, from when you start speaking.
Chairman, fellow councillors, thank you for the opportunity to address you on this item. I am the planning consultant for the applicant, and I also dealt with the original application for the 135 houses on Sturt Farm. The application before you is to consider the planning merits of an alternative access arrangement using the existing access road into the site to serve the consented 135 homes, including 40% affordable housing. This access was in fact the favoured access from Surrey County Council at the time of the original application, and this was on the basis of highway safety. Whilst this was also our preferred option at that time, my client simply did not control the required land and could not deliver this option. However, the benefits of the preferred option can now be delivered. And those benefits include much improved visibility displays, an entrance that's moved further from the brow of the hill, making it significantly safer. And during construction, there will be far less disruption to the local highway network and no requirement for significant road closures. Obviously, it's also better to have fewer accesses onto a road rather than more. As with the original access proposal, the current committee report lists the public benefits of the revised scheme and confirms that on balance, these more than outweigh any heritage impact. There are also additional public benefits which the applicant considers should be fully acknowledged in the current planning balance. You will have heard from your officers earlier that Surrey County Council representatives wrote yesterday and I believe today to Waverley Borough Council to reconfirm their preference for this proposal on highway safety grounds. They have done this in order that highway safety benefits mentioned earlier are properly considered in the planning balance. The original 2nd of February 2015 report to committee on the Sturt Farm site confirmed that there would be key public benefits arising from the significant contribution made towards meeting Waverley's overall housing requirements. Your planning officers accept that this additional public benefit should be acknowledged in the current planning balance. The revised scheme also enables, as you've heard, the maximum number of houses to be delivered under the terms of the current planning consent. This is an important public benefit as it helps to negate the possible need for yet more housing sites elsewhere and leads me on to my third and final point. In considering this application, it is important in the context of paragraph 159 of the National Planning Policy Framework for members to accept that the Sturt Farm allocation represents an essential component of the agreed Waverley housing strategy within the emerging local plan. It will contribute significantly to the local housing requirements for both market and affordable housing, but equally, this will occur when there is an overriding need within Waverley for housing demand. 2 years and 10 months have elapsed since I first addressed this committee on this development, and not a single brick has been laid on the Sturt Farm site. In these circumstances, I respectfully request that you endorse your officer's recommendation and allow the applicants to move forward immediately with the strategically important housing scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Members, I open it to you. Councillor Munner.
Thank you, Chairman. It's quite clear that this application inevitably involves some harm, and the report, which is very comprehensive, very fairly lays out what that is. The heritage assets, not surprisingly, get the greatest attention, but I think it's fair to say that the residential amenity of not merely current but future occupiers also should be taken into account. And there can be no doubt that there is going to be a very large difference between the current very quiet cul-de-sac, which causes very few vehicle movements onto Sturt Road and no through movements at all, compared to the fairly major access road, 2 carriageways, 5.5 metres across, plus the footpaths. So unfortunately, if we did not have heritage assets, this would be something of a no-brainer, but we do. If we didn't have dwellings there, it would be easy, but we do. And we cannot deny that the NPPF places great importance on looking after heritage assets. They are not something which grow. We have what we have, and we should take great efforts, whether we're the decision maker or developers, to preserve them. So I think we start off from the position that there is harm, and is the planning balance such that the benefits outweigh it. For me, the only two that have any merit are, first of all, the impact on housing numbers, but that when you consider what's happened at Sturt Farm, and I was intimately involved with the town council three years ago, it was very much the idea that the building that was permitted would be the only building on Sturt Hill. But as we know, recently the applicant was successful in an appeal to erect a net of further 27 dwellings further up the hill. So frankly, in terms of what we as a borough are getting out of this site, we're all getting rather more than we expected, and not necessarily happily. And so I don't think much weight should be given to the fact that the applicant has said that his initial estimate was too high, but he can give us 11 more if we allow him to have this access. I think the only thing that does cause me to think hard is the effect on the street scene. I've looked at that several times. I don't think the street scene at the moment is a great thing of beauty. I don't think that retaining wall would ever qualify as a listed building itself. And I think properly engineered, the consented access would be just as smart, probably smarter. Given the slope, I don't think there's any sense in which the built site would be particularly visible from the road. So I'm not that inclined to be persuaded by that. I do accept there'll be more disruption, but that's a temporary matter. I also remember that we looked at the highway impacts of the consented access very carefully 3 years ago, and highways were content that it would be safe enough. I can accept that the proposed access is safer, but that doesn't mean the consented access was unacceptable. The Surrey highways were content with it then. So although I can understand why the officers reached the decision that they did, my feeling is that the Sturt Farm collection is worth preserving. It will be completely different if we drive an access road through it. And therefore, at the moment, I am not minded to support the officer's recommendation. I look forward to hearing what others have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Earls.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I attended the site visit on Monday, which I found very interesting, and thank the officers for showing us round. I took the opportunity to stand on the side of the road where the entrance, the approved entrance, would come out, and to check out on the sight lines from there. And then again, I had, having parked in the existing access, had the opportunity to drive out of there later on. And I must say that didn't strike me that the proposed access was any safer for sight lines than the existing one. And I'm really surprised that Surrey Highways can now say that this is safer than the other one. So they're suggesting that the one that they said was perfectly safe a couple of years ago suddenly isn't so safe, which I do find slightly worrying. I agree with Councillor Mullen on virtually everything he said, and it sort of comes down, to my mind, to a choice between a lot of engineering work, which is going to cost the developer a lot of money, and 11 less units, most of which will be sold on the open market, so there's less money there, as against driving a 5.5 metre wide carriageway with 1.8 footpaths either side through the middle of it'll totally destroy the setting of a historical group of what were originally agricultural buildings. And as Councillor Mullen had just said, it is at the moment, he described it as a cul-de-sac. It's just a drive serving a few houses. And the thought of hundreds of cars powering past there every day and every morning, every evening is quite frightening, I think. So I think I'll wait to hear what others say, but I'm minded to go against the officer's recommendation at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I take on board what Councillor Mulliner and Councillor Else are saying very much. One thing that's disturbed me is that the professional outfit that spends a lot of money in preparing plans to be put before the planning officers for their decision and possible councillors' decision, find themselves then saying afterwards, well, we've made a mistake. And that doesn't sit very well with me, to be quite frank. Something else is behind this. The aspect of, the engineering work for the existing plans that have been approved, in this day and age, with all the machinery that there is available, then I don't really think that's a major problem at all. And it is down to the developer and the construction people to provide things either quickly or slowly. Now, the other aspect concerns safety, doesn't it? Well, looking at these plans, it isn't very evident that the splays are significantly different. But safety is as much down to the users of the highway and pathways as it is to the actual designs themselves. So you can't necessarily say that something is definitely going to be safer in one position than the other, I don't think. And quite definitely, the present cul-de-sac will become a major thoroughfare for a significant number of vehicles, and that really will disturb the amenity of the existing buildings and the residents. So those are just my thoughts for what they're worth. Thank you.
Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I accept that there is going to be certainly a heritage impact on those buildings. Although I couldn't go to the site visit this week, I remember very distinctly the site visit when this original application was considered. I think we've had an explanation of why the developers are now wishing to change the accessway. They've changed the accessway because previously they couldn't put in an application for that because they didn't have control of the land that would be necessary to put it in, and therefore potentially they would be wasting their time to get a planning application if they didn't have the necessary rights and so on over the land necessary to comply with what the Highways Authority would be wanting. But we've been told now that those obstacles have been overcome, that the preferred access all along was the one that is now being considered today, and that that is the reason why they've changed their views or changed the request to this borough to make the accessway now in the existing, as it's been described, cul-de-sac. I have to say, I was unhappy 3 years ago on the removal of a large substantial part of the wall and having the accessway further up the hill than is now being proposed. And the highways have said, I think, as I understand it, both accessways would be safe. After all, they said that on the first one, and they're saying it on the second one. But the accessway that is now being proposed would be safer. And they are the experts on that, and to suggest that it depends upon highway users, they could make it less safe if they used the current one rather than the old one. I mean, it's not a consideration. The consideration is the highways think that the proposed cul-de-sac would be safer. We do have the speed of delivery. We do have the disruption of a large amount of engineering to put in this this accessway. A lot of earth would have to be removed. I suspect traffic lights, if at the best, if not a road closure while they're doing some of it. And I accept, of course, that is only a temporary inconvenience and it wouldn't be long term. But we also have the extra houses. I'd understood, but I may be wrong, that the town council's position has changed. I don't know if it has or it hasn't, and I would like clarification whether the town council still object or not. But certainly on balance, having considered them very carefully, my present view is that I would go along with the officer's recommendations.
Come in now. Louise?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, in relation to the County Highway Authority, Councillor Goodrich his comments are accurate, and the County Highway Authority found both accesses to be safe and acceptable, but their preferred option is the proposed access as part of this application. In relation to the Town Council, we have had verbal confirmation that they no longer wish to object, but we haven't had that in writing, so it isn't formal. Thank you.
Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it's the second time I went on a site visit to this site. The first time we looked at the access which was approved, I was particularly, well, not horrified, but apprehensive about that very tall wall. I can't really tell how high it is. About 12 feet high, something in that order, maybe more. But whatever, the removal of that and the access road going in through that seemed pretty horrendous, but as you quite rightly have said, people have said Highways Authority accepted that was a reasonable route to take. I also remember a lot of concern at that time about flooding on the houses opposite, outside of our borough, so should we worry about them? Of course we should, but over the way there was talk about the problems of flooding going over the road and down the footpath, etc. We've heard no comments about that at all this time. Is it because they accept that one or the other is going to cause that problem perhaps, or is it because this one is less likely to cause the problem of flooding going across the road, flow of surface water going across the road and causing a problem? It's clear to me that the new access proposed is preferable in terms of safety and visual status, except for the listed buildings. But when we look at those listed buildings, there's been quite a lot of work around them. There's two modern garages in front which hide completely any view, or not completely, but substantially the views of some of the properties. And of course, those two garages, I believe, have benefited from the fact that they're using somebody else's land to probably park in front of their garages rather than going onto their own land. But I understand that the owners of those properties now believe it's better, they are happier with this than having the intrusion of a road to the back of them. And we haven't seen photographs, I don't think, of the back of the properties and how it will be affected, but people will argue about the setting of a listed building from whatever aspect. So all in all, I believe this is a better alternative and an acceptable alternative, and therefore I will be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually deferred to Councillor Byam, and I wish I hadn't now because you've more or less said what I was going to say. Having been on the site visit, we're not dealing with an untouched cluster of listed buildings, and Sean Ricks was with us on the site visit to explain his views on the harm to the listed buildings. As Councillor Byam has said, they are separate dwellings and have been amended, changed, whatevered, as people do to their houses. And you have these discrete homes, which are very nice. And you can understand why, one likes the status quo. But what we're looking at here, as Councillor Byam says, is something that is going to be harmful to the view of the road. You just can't knock that down without producing some enormous gorge. Whereas here, if it's done in sympathetic materials and bearing in mind the historic buildings that are there and using, as I say, the right sort of surfaces, the right sort of materials, then I personally think this has to be less harmful. I know there's a harm to the heritage buildings, but I think in terms of the general amenity and the roads and everything else, that this is a much better solution for that area to get the traffic to and from the site. And we always regret extra traffic whenever we give permission, but I think having seen it on site and having had a really good look at it and having taken the reassurance from the Heritage Officer, then I think this is the better solution, and I shall certainly be supporting the officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm in two minds over this because I can see both sides of it, although I wasn't able to go to the site visit. I was working, and I've only stopped and had a look. I haven't actually been on the site myself, so I can't add to what members have said there, but if I can refer you, Chairman, to page 3 of our documents, the last paragraph on there says that an obligation, I'm quoting, an obligation within the legal agreement is recommended to ensure both accesses could not be implemented, and the current application has been assessed on this basis. Okay. I can't see any way that we, as a committee, are, at the moment, if we agree to the officer's recommendation, I can't see that we're doing that. So the officers, it looks to me like, are saying that they're recommending that there's an obligation within the legal agreement, but I can't see that we're actually doing that. So, and I might be wrong, maybe some bits of paper somewhere or other, but I think they have to be in front of us here rather than hidden in a Section 106 agreement, which could, of course, be changed after our decision unless we've got a stipulation. I have a similar concern in respect of the revised recommendation. That's on page 3 of the update sheet, Chairman. So if I can refer you to another page 3. It's recommendation A no longer contains a time limit. We always have some sort of time limit on these, and there's a 6-month time limit within recommendation B is still there, but the one which was in the earlier version of recommendation A is no longer there. I'm not going to move that the recommendations be changed to take account of what I've said. I'll leave that to somebody who is definitely in favour of this, because I want to hear what other people have said, and I'm not sure everybody's had their chance to speak yet. But I think we might need to modify the recommendations there. I've got my usual concerns with respect to page 33. We've got a paragraph in effect on the SPA there where, well, for certain, I don't know that there is a Weldon Heath and East Hants SPA, and buffer zone is made up. I thought that actually our local plan said that there were 7 and 9 kilometre visitor catchments areas. It then says SANG's required to mitigate the impact of human activity. Well, no, it isn't. I mean, we don't have a policy. The law certainly doesn't say that. The law is in respect of an impact and doesn't mention SANGs. And we don't have a policy in place at the moment on the Weldon Heaths. And Natural England's 8 hectares and criteria that need to be set, they don't stick to those either. So I would query a lot of that. So if you would confirm for me at some point whether that is true or not. But what I really want to know here, we need an appropriate assessment. I'd like our officers to, and I haven't seen one anywhere, an appropriate assessment of the impacts, and that has to contain convincing objective evidence in view of the conservation objective. That's the bird numbers, and I've looked and I haven't seen anything that contains that. So if you can just confirm, please, that it would be lawful for us to grant consent without, whether it would be lawful for us to grant consent without an appropriate assessment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Louise to come back on that, but I think the two aspects, the two entrances are conditioned anyway. Louise?
I think I'm going to respond to the first point, and then Lewis is going to respond to the comment on the SPA. In relation to the recommendation, again, if I can draw members' attention to page 3 of the update sheet, this recommends that permission is granted, but this is subject to a legal agreement to secure the SANG requirements, but also to make sure that only one of the accesses is implemented. So the legal agreement will effectively say, if this consent is implemented, then the previous access could not be implemented, and it will also say if that previous access has already been implemented, then this access could not be implemented. So we're satisfied that the legal agreement will ensure that the two accesses couldn't be delivered in combination together. Thank you.
And Lewis?
Thank you, Chair. There is case law on Councillor Hyman's point in relation to whether or not we can grant permission in the absence of an appropriate assessment. The particular case law does relate to environmental impact assessments, but we believe it's analogous to habitats assessments. Essentially, the case law says that if a screening process or an assessment has been taken place in relation to the original scheme, in this case it would be the outline permission, and planning officers are confident that the results would be the same as that original assessment, then they are entitled to conclude that a further assessment is not necessary. In fact, the case specifically says that a planning officer was right to consider that further screening processes would have been superfluous in that instance. So I think in this case, appropriate assessments were carried out for the outline permission, and planning officers are confident that the results wouldn't change as a result of the proposed access here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lewis. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to echo what Councillor Coburn said, because she said it much better than I possibly could have done. And I agree with everything she said. I think that the heritage assets, there are some there, but not all of them are heritage assets. There's certainly no cohesion as a central farm anymore. It's all broken up into individual properties. I can see that there should be some loss of amenity to the owners of those homes, but I think the benefits of having 132 additional homes far outweighs, unfortunately, the loss of amenity in those few homes near the entrance. Of course, that entrance would also service the Sang, and it would be required to service the Sang anyway, even if the other entrance was used, because the Sang is all over on the that right-hand side. I do have a slight concern over the display, because when I turned right out of the current row, that house down in the bottom left-hand corner of that picture, no, the other one, that's it, that does or did appear to obstruct the view down the road, but it may be that was just the hedge or part of something. I see the display, I think, is being moved back a bit, so that might make it easier. But otherwise, I think this is a significant improvement on the previous application, and I will support it.
Thank you. Members, if there are no further comments, no additional bits, we will move to the recommendation unless the officers wish to make any final summary.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not a point of summary, just a point of clarification on the access. It's been raised a couple of times. On page 26 of your agenda, there is actually a slight realignment of the highway, which will bring the point of the junction slightly further forward to achieve an improved visibility display. So I just wanted to make that point because it had been picked up a couple of times. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge, you want to come back?
Thank you. As we're coming to the recommendation, Councillor Hyman raised what could be a good point, that there is no time limit for the legal agreement. That may be a good point, but it seems we need a cut-off point at some stage. Otherwise, we could be in limbo for an awful long time. And therefore, I'm sure they'll get on with it, but I think we ought to be setting a time limit subject to what our officers may have to say.
Louise?
Thank you, Chairman. The time limit is actually in recommendation B, so if we do get to 6 months and the legal agreement hasn't been signed, then we will be refusing the application. You don't need to have the time limit in both recommendation A and recommendation B. Thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It really, it's on that last point. The way I read recommendation in its original form is that the access had to be completed within 6 months. Am I wrong on that? because it says the access being completed within 6 months from the date of this decision. So is that a change?
Louise?
There's a comma missing in that original recommendation, but it is replaced by the recommendation on page 3 of your update sheet, so that has now been superseded. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Edwards, as the local ward councillor, I'm afraid you missed the first 25 minutes of the meeting. Is there anything you want to add that is significant at this point?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would agree with Councillor Adams that the sight line turning right out of that entrance is impossible to see. It's very dangerous, and it is part of the building, part of the barn that's there at the present time. But my main concern is the fact that they were saying less than substantial harm to the setting. There's substantial harm to the setting. You can have 400 movements a day out of that, at least. And that setting is absolutely unique in my ward, and I would have think in Hazelmere. It's a 17th century setting. All right, it's been enhanced by new materials, but come on, let's get serious here. This is a major development, and it's causing serious harm to that setting, and it's unacceptable. We have to be seemly here and look at the actual facts of what's happening. That's all I've got to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, I'll move to the recommendation. Revised recommendation on page 3 of the update sheet. Recommendation A, that permission be granted subject to a legal agreement to secure the SANG requirements and the implementation of the access proposed as part of the consent instead of the previous consented access being completed and subject to conditions 1 to 10 and informatives 1 to 2 set out on the pages of the agenda report. Those in favour of recommendation A, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Abstentions.
Abstentions?
1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much indeed. That is passed. Recommendation B, permission be refused in the event of a Section 106 agreement is not completed within 6 months of the resolution to grant planning permission for the following reasons as set out on pages 3 and 4 of the update sheet. Those in favour of recommendation A, please show. B, recommendation B.
Yeah, unanimous.
No. Thank you very much. Any abstentions? It was unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Before we dash home, can I just make 2 comments? We've got another JPC next week on Sweeters Copse. Most of us have already been on a site visit. There is one proposed for the 13th. Do people wish to go and stand in the field again and have a look at what's there, or can I assume that we can cancel that site visit? Councillor Lee.
Chairman, it will be my first time. But I could be independent, perhaps.
Indeed.
There is a pavement.
Indeed, there is a pavement that I think we can go. And in that case, the site visit would be cancelled. Can I just say, members, it's Peter Cleveland's farewell performance at JPC. He leaves the authority on Friday. We wish him all the very best in his future. He has been a very competent and cheerful member of this planning authority, and we thank you, Peter, very sincerely for all the work you've done in the years that you've been here. Thank you very much. All the very best for the future.
And please don't come back and present against us.
Yeah. Thank you, members.